Welcome to Trifecta Collective, Finding the Root with Megan and Shannon, the podcast, where we dive deep into all things health and wellness to help you find health and healing inside and out for now and forever. Hello, and welcome to Trifecta Collective, Finding the Root with Megan and Shannon. I'm Megan Abbott, owner and founder of the holistic health practice, Trifecta Collective, and this is my co-host, Shannon Calery. She is the head practitioner within the practice here. We're so excited to have you back and joining us. Today's topic, if you didn't already see the title, is mold and mold toxicity, mold illness. So we're going to do a deep dive into mold here, and I'm going to expect that this is going to be several parts. Mold is very, very complex, and there's a lot that comes with mold illness, mold toxicity. I don't know if we'll have enough time today to talk about like mast cell activation syndrome, all the histamine responses, yeast and fungus issues, parasite issues that come along with this. We're just going to kind of see how far we can get. But we're going to start with an overview of like how do you get mold illness and how do you get mold toxicity? And we'll go over like testing. We're going to do a pretty deep dive into testing because mold is very complex when it comes to testing. And there's a lot of ways we can do this before we dive into to more of how do we start addressing this and what do those steps look like so that we can actually heal. I'm going to say two things kind of upfront here as well. The first is if you have mold illness, mold toxicity, or suspect that you do, I cannot recommend enough that you work with someone who is mold literate, who has experience dealing with mold and helping people heal from mold. And I don't think this is super well known just because when I talk to people, it's hard to understand this unless you're in this space as a practitioner. But most programs that many of us go through, Shannon and I went through the Nutritional Therapy Association, even programs around like functional medicine, holistic health, holistic nutrition. By and large, there are exceptions here, but by and large, mold, especially a deep dive into mold, is not covered. And almost always additional training needs to be done in order to really get a full understanding of not only mold and mold toxicity, mold illness itself, but also everything that also comes along with it. And this is the big mistake that I see so often from people who have been diagnosed or just told that they have mold issues of just not understanding you can't just take a mold binder. That's not by itself, that's not going to just fix you. There's a lot of other things that come along with this. So if you have the opportunity to work with someone who is mold literate, who has additional training, who has a lot of experience, who works and dives deep into mold and everything that comes along with mold, I cannot recommend that enough. And I know that is not an option for everyone. So I do want to acknowledge that. But if that is an option for you, I cannot recommend it enough. You can always reach out to us. We are a very mold literate practice. And Shannon, correct me if I'm wrong, but probably close to 45, 50% of our practice are clients with mold issues. So we do have a ton of experience. We have a very, very high success rate in helping people heal from this. So we are always a resource. And as a reminder, we offer free consults. So you can talk to us. We're happy to help and support you the best we can. Obviously, we can't do everything in a free consult. And we will talk about other options if that's something you're interested in, but we do offer that as well. The other thing I want to say is mold is very complicated. If you are doing this on your own, please go very, very, very slow.
Yeah, in bonus, I want to intrude
Yeah,
here. I also healed from mold, so I know what it takes. I was probably one of the more like intense cases. So yeah, like we are pretty experienced with this, and I feel very confident in saying that, especially because I've been through it myself.
exactly. And I've done many, many trainings, a variety of trainings around mold. I don't follow any I'm not in a mold camp. I don't follow just one specific, this is the protocol we use. Like, this is what we do for mold. We, I don't think you can do that. We haven't seen that work. By and large, every case is a little bit different, and there are different things that we really need to look at and address. There are some big outstanding ones, which we'll obviously talk about. And there's also some big ones that we see missed quite a bit. So we'll talk about those too. So just wanted to talk about that before we dive into this.
Yeah, definitely. I thank you for that. I mean, again, just like we do our best during consults. We know that not everyone can afford it. It is expensive. Mold takes a lot of time, which we'll get into that. But yeah, I mean, if you think you're struggling with this and you want to consult, like we will truly do our best to try and give you some support or walk you through it in the best way that we can without actually working with us. But yeah, let's dive in to the
Okay.
number one part on the list. Do you want to start or do you want me to?
You can go ahead.
Okay. So we want to talk about or start with why mold is an issue for some people or just not why it's not an issue for everyone essentially because we are all exposed to mold everywhere. So kind of very similar to with other topics that we've talked about, if your body is in a good place, your liver's functioning well, it can process these things out. Like that is the point of your body is, it's here to keep things going, keep toxin overload down, toxin burden down, however you want to word that. So if you're a person who has been exposed to mold and you never felt any issues from it or nothing came of it, it's probably because your body was able to handle it and process it out on its own. Not everyone is like that. I would say the standard American probably isn't like that. Just so many factors. We're exposed to a lot of toxins. We take a lot of medications. If you're not eating good quality food or the standard American diet, there's so many things that play a role here. So which most of society is that way. And that's the point of like going in and supporting your body and making it so we can process these things out. So I would say that's like those are the two biggest things, like why everyone doesn't have mold toxicity is because their body can process it out.
Absolutely. And another really big piece of this is chronic stress.
Oh,
And if you have a history of trauma, especially if a lot of your symptoms started when you were young, as a child, and you were exposed and lived in a home that had mold in it, and we will dive into sources of mold toxicity. But if you had a lot of trauma, it is not surprising that you would be impacted more, even more so than other people who were also living in the same place. If you have I also want to say this, and I'm going to kind of go this way in two parts here, but if you have a genetic predisposition to higher stress, for example, if you have a genetic predisposition to autoimmunity, there's a higher likelihood just because you can activate those genes. And if we look at epigenetics, just because we have that genetic predisposition, and you will always hear me talk about genetic predisposition versus genetic mutation, genetic mutation or genetic, genetic change. Genes can turn on and off. And we know that about the body. This is why I am not the biggest fan by and large of genetic testing. Yes, there is some value in it for certain people, but genes can turn on and off. We can turn these things on and off. We know that. And this is why you can put autoimmunity into remission sometimes, depending on the person, depending on how long. I am case in point. I was diagnosed Hashimoto's. My Hashimoto's has been put into remission for many years at this point. No antibodies, thyroid levels across the board, all of them look good. So if you have some of these genetic predispositions, there is a higher likelihood that you will be more sensitive because those genes can turn on and can be activated by a big trigger like mold and being exposed to mold, let alone all of the chronic stress, all of the trauma piece here. If you lived and moved into a place that had mold, or you were exposed or worked in a place and you were under a lot of stress, once again, the likelihood that you're going to have more of an issue than anyone else around you goes up so much. And we see this all the time. And the question is always asked, why me? Why am I so sensitive? Why is this such a big issue for me? And not my significant other, not a parent, not a sibling, not a friend, not a coworker. And I want to emphasize that there's nothing wrong with you. It's it's so many factors that can go into this, and a lot of it is just if you're a sensitive person, and I consider myself a very, very sensitive person. And it's taken me a while to embrace that and to view it as a strength because I absolutely believe it is. Yes, there are other things to consider here, but just because you ended up sick and having these issues doesn't mean you can't heal. And two, doesn't mean there's something wrong with you. It's just your body's a little bit more sensitive and we can heal given the right conditions. And it's all about how do we give the body those right conditions, which those conditions were not there in the first place.
Yeah. I love that you brought that up too about just being sensitive in general, because that is looked at as a negative in society. And really, when you start to understand it and tune into it and tune into yourself, all you're doing is just getting to know yourself better and what works for you, what works better for your body, so you can ultimately feel better. And that is not a bad thing. There's nothing wrong with that. So, yeah, I'm glad that you brought that part up. And after you go through something like this, like healing from mold or whatnot, when you come out on that other side, like, you're I'm for instance, I am also a sensitive person, still sensitive, but you use it in a different way. You're just using it to guide your life in a better direction, to get closer with yourself, your intuition. So yeah, it's not a bad thing.
It is not. And I did not deal with mold. Mold was not one of my struggles. Heavy metal toxicity was an issue for me. And it's it's not the same. I and I hate to say like what's worse, and I will say mold is probably worse. Mold is just like there's a lot that comes with mold, and so it's just complicated. And I am definitely like a crazy sensitive person, and some of this goes into the energy work that I do and just tapping into all of that. But yeah, I definitely came out of all of my healing. Just, I mean, even sensitive to smells, being around large groups of people is still like I've got to make sure I'm emotionally and energetically prepared for that. And there's just like other considerations. And once again, it has taken me a while, and we see this with clients all the time to embrace that, to understand it, and how do you make it a strength? Because it really can be. So if that sounds like you, just know that you're not alone. It's okay. And you can work with it as a strength, and it's really about learning how to do that, and it can be challenging, it can feel very lonely and very isolating at the same time, but you're not alone.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, definitely, what kind of ties into that too is when you have something like mold, it's not an obvious thing. It's not like you're going to go into your regular like primary care and they're going to say, "Oh, like this is what's going on for you." No, that's not how it works. It actually takes a really long time. Or if you find information that's out there and you resonate with it and you start to think, "Oh, I want to get some of these tests done to see if it's mold or whatnot." But there's a lot of dismissing of symptoms and feelings and not feeling validated that also goes in with part of this, and we will dive into that more. But the emotional slash, like, I guess we could say, medical trauma side to this also kind of ties into.
Yeah. Yeah. I've been doing this a long time, and I have yet to ever hear or meet of a physician who was familiar with mold toxicity, which the science is out there. There are amazing and really, really solid studies out there proving this, showing this, how to heal from this, different resources. It's just not taught, like so many of these other things as well.
Yeah.
So let's talk about how we can exposure, because obviously some of the exposure is going to be pretty obvious and some of it's not going to be so obvious. So let's dive into all of this. So by and large, living and or working in a place that has mold growing, and I'm not talking like a little mildew here and there, or I'm talking actual like significant mold, is going to be the most common source. And this is often from water damage is probably the most common. Now, not all of that is obvious, is part of the problem, is it can be real sneaky. I've seen all kinds of the craziest places and most hidden places where mold has popped up. But if you've ever had a leak in your basement, leak in a shower or a bathroom of any sort, and it wasn't fully remediated, and especially remediated very quickly, there's a very good chance that
Mhm.
there's a mold issue.
Yeah. Yeah, mold is sneaky. I mean, one of the things that we talk about often with people is like if you've had a long standing leak going on, like you just mentioned, like there's people who when they're trying to get it fixed, they're especially in the bathrooms or the kitchen, like taking the drywall off or whatever it may be, and there's mold like all behind it. It's just really sneaky and it's also like we get it. It's not cheap to have that stuff done. It's hard to get it fixed. But yeah, so I would say like wet basements, like bathroom leaks, mold is super common in the bathroom, especially if you don't have the right type of ventilation. In the kitchen, like under the sink, small leaks, that's another big area.
Behind the cabinets too, that's a really common one.
Yeah, behind the cabinets. Also the environment that you live in. Like I'm in Texas right now. Mold is so common here just because it's humid all the time. So it's like the perfect environment for mold to grow in. So where you live also kind of matters.
Just
The
want to
H,
name, just real quick, while we're
yeah.
talking about locations, just a few other places where I've seen it be a really big issue. Texas, Florida, North Carolina, Louisiana
Hmm.
are like really, really big ones. And this does not discount any other place. So just throwing a few places out there where I've seen it be really, really a big issue.
Yeah. Like so big so that there's actually specific lawyers dedicated to fighting people's cases on mold because it's that prevalent in these locations. So I don't have names, but if you're interested, you can look that up on your own and
Yeah.
dive into it. But yeah, so the other big thing is HVAC units. So like your air conditioning, your heat, if there's any mold, black mold going on in there, I mean what that's doing is just blowing and spreading out into the house. You're breathing it in. Really easy to get exposed that way.
And it
What
can
are
be really, I've seen it be so sneaky I mean, I have a client I've been working with for many years, and she had all of the air ducts cleaned and had all of this remediation done. And then there was a one little compartment, and I'm not a maintenance person. So, but I know generally I could talk generally about this, but there was a place inside of her HVAC unit that like was a really like small little area, and it was growing in there and then being recirculated out. And she worked with a really good mold company, and it was just like happened to be missed, and they were going to replace the unit, and then they found it.
wow.
And it was keeping her sick forever, and was a huge part of her healing journey. And I mean, it's really crazy where mold can pop up. I would also say like around the washer, like if you have like your laundry unit, I've seen a couple, especially apartments, where there's been just the tiniest little leak in there, and it's been growing behind the wall, and then just like festers out all over the place, or even like comes down from a different apartment into that. So that, I mean, that's all on the table.
Yeah. And it's tough with apartments too, just because you don't have as much control over like fixing things. I know in places like Texas and Louisiana, and I can't remember what else you listed, but they actually, because they know mold is an issue, they will put specific clauses in contracts saying like, we won't cover this. And so sometimes like you just got to do your best when you're in an apartment, if you have the opportunity to move, that's going to be the best option. If you don't, there's other things that you can do. And we'll talk about that eventually too.
Yeah, and the other thing I want to say about this is, we think about old buildings. A lot of times, a lot of the questions that we'll ask if we suspect mold is, have you ever lived somewhere or worked somewhere that was like really old or, like hasn't been updated? And yes, that's also true. And I've seen plenty of new builds, brand new houses, brand new apartment buildings also have mold issues. And if the builder does not do a great job, and once again, like this is not my area of expertise, but I've just seen it enough to be able to talk a little bit about it. In that if they don't do a good enough job of covering the new build, especially in one of these places that has a lot of rain, has a lot of humidity, I mean, mold can just start growing as the new building or new house is being built. So, yes, oftentimes newer is better, but also that does not guarantee there's also not an issue.
Yeah, and just real quick to add on to that, going through your house, and I am also not an expert in this. However, I do follow a lot of like mold remediation accounts at this point, but just like checking all the like any point of drainage, so like shower drainage, sink drainage in the bathroom, in the kitchen, all these places, making sure they are actually draining and draining properly is a huge thing when you have like a new build or when you're moving into a newer build of a home. And those, if it's not draining right, that right there is a good indication that it's something you might want to look into a little bit more.
Yeah, absolutely. So just, those are always some good places. I'll also say when, and we're going to talk about how to test here. And once again, this is not our area of expertise, but yes, we can give some guidance here. Just because a mold test comes back negative in a house also is not a guarantee
Mhm.
that you don't have a mold issue. So, actually, before I dive into that, is there anything else you want to share?
Kind of adding on to that, I mean, just like, and again, you don't, even if you're having symptoms, which we're going to talk about here in a second, it doesn't mean that you need to be currently living in mold because, again, like it matters how your body is functioning. So I just want to add that in real quick.
Yes, absolutely. So it could be a previous place where you worked, where you lived, where you went to school is also a really big one. It's very, I mean, it breaks my heart every time, but I've worked with a handful of teenagers who have gotten sick at their schools, and I've heard even more stories. We don't specialize in children. We will work with older teenagers. And I mean, it's really heartbreaking to see what happens when these schools have mold. And where I am right now in Virginia, there's been a couple cases that have recently come up in regards to this, and my heart breaks because I know what some of these kids are going to start going through. And once again, the kids who are more sensitive and have a lot of stress going on and other things, I know what they're about to experience and the lack of support that they will often find, especially in the traditional Western medicine community. And yeah, so that is also on the table here.
Yeah.
So getting into testing here, so there's a few ways to go about testing. The most accessible and probably cheapest way to start, if you suspect you are potentially currently living in a place with mold or working in a place with mold, is an ERMI test. And we'll put a link in the show notes here. So the ERMI is a dust test. And you can use a Swiffer with this, like a Swiffer cloth, Swifter
You said it
cloth,
right.
Swiffer. Okay. Cool. It's been a minute since I've talked about a Swiffer. But you can use one of those cloths or they can give you a cloth and you go through and you basically take dust samples. It's not perfect by any means, but it is a really good and more accessible start. I think they start around $250. Some of the more advanced ones go up to like $450, I think. And it's a good start. Please read all of the instructions and best practices before you do this. I think the current recommendation is at least 60 to 90 days worth of dust. which means like the baseboards, windowsills in particular, you want to try to avoid cleaning those for that period of time so you get the most accurate sample. If it's a place where you work or like a school, obviously that can be more challenging. Maybe
Yeah.
not if they don't have the best cleaning practices, depending on where it is and who's cleaning. But that is something to take into consideration that you do want a time period of a sample in order to get more accurate results. And once again, please read the recommendations. But just as a side note, I do like to reinforce that. There are
I
mold.
think,
Oh, go ahead.
oh, I was just going to say, I think they also talk about the up by the HVAC, like the
Yes.
vent, like where the AC comes out, something on the ceiling, like that doesn't get touched very often. That's a really great place to check for it too.
Yes, yes, absolutely. Especially because those air ducts are a really, really commonplace for mold to become an issue and to grow. They have, yeah, mold companies, check around your area if you suspect this. It's going to be more expensive. And sometimes, hopefully more often than not, more accurate. I will say once again, this is not my area of expertise, but I also follow a lot of people. This is covered somewhat in a lot of the trainings that I've done. Air samples are not great. They do not give very accurate results. So if you talk to a mold company and they only do air samples, my suggestion would be to see if there's a company that does other testing.
Mhm.
There's also mold dogs, and I've heard amazing reviews about mold dogs by and large because once again, mold can hide. I mean, I've seen people, it's been under their bathroom floor and no one's been able to test it unless they rip up the floor, which
Yeah.
most people aren't trying to rip up their bathroom floor and deconstruct their house while trying to search for it. Sometimes it has to be done, but um, that that's also a really good option for a lot of people. So take a look. You can do a search for it, mold dogs, but I've heard really good reviews about that.
We'll uh we'll put that in the ERMI in the show notes just so you can see it.
Yeah. Okay. So yeah, that'll be super good. So, and then remediation itself, there's a lot of controversy around that. Once again, not our area of expertise, but just bleaching it, just like putting a spray over it, typically does not cut it. Also, make sure you find the source and address the actual source of it. Also, make sure to fully check where it has spread because it can, especially if it's been there for a while. I mean, if you're going to remediate, try and remediate it all at once. Otherwise, you're going to spend another like handful of thousands, tens of thousands of dollars doing this. So if you can do it all at once and really like make sure, especially if it's in the bathroom, like where has it spread outside of the bathroom, where up, where down, along the sides, outside of that, really try and look at all of that to make just mistakes that I've seen people have to go through this so many times. So if you can just avoid all of that and just really do it all at once, that would be great for you.
Yeah, and just adding a couple more things here. I have two clients who are going through this process right now, and they actually their insurance is I don't know if it's covering all of it or covering part of it, but that is always an option to look into if you're dealing with this. Um, and I just lost the second thing I was gonna say. So if it comes back to me, I
Ah,
will let you know.
okay, perfect. And if you are an apartment, by and large, I have one exception to this that I've seen, but by and large, they're not going to be super helpful. They're not going to do a great job at addressing it. They might just ignore it. They might spray it. So just be mindful of that and know that's usually what it is. It's very unfortunate, and I know it's not possible for you to get out at all times. It's very expensive to move, all that kind of stuff. So just be very mindful of that. Also, once again, not my area of expertise, but spore cleaning and everything else that comes along with it. It's just not just about if you're currently living in it, just addressing the mold, but also addressing all of the spores that can come along with that. Air filters go a really long way, like specific cleaning of clothes and bedding and furniture, anything cloth that can hold on to the spores in particular, really valuable to do some toxin cleaning around that.
Yeah. And I know this is a little bit controversial of an opinion, but I know I've seen a lot of practitioners go to extremes here with like you need to throw everything out, throw all your clothing out, all your bedding, and that is frustrating to me because I don't think it's very realistic for most people to do that. I didn't do that. I probably would never do that. That's a lot of money to just replace everything. So I think that there's ways, just you got to look into this part a little bit more. I don't have the full answer here, but like properly cleaning your clothes, maybe using a specific like solution or detergent to do that. The air filter, I cannot remember the name of it right now. There is one air filter that is really great for clearing out mold spores in your house. We'll find the name and we'll put that in the show notes too. But there are some other options here. And I've also seen people like who have healed from mold. They're afraid to let people come into their apartment because they don't want to bring mold in. And I just want to mention like these are extremes here. I am fully healed from mold. People come in and out of my apartment. I go out into the world. Like I am fine as long as I keep supporting my body in the best way for me. Like it doesn't need to be that intense and extreme of a process.
Exactly. And when we get into how we heal this, we're going to talk a lot about nervous system regulation work. And this is a huge piece. Once again, this is a huge piece that we see missed in the healing process of mold. The other thing, and I'll let you mention this, that there's kind of there's some once again, there's controversy around food. And can we get mold toxicity from food? It depends. I'd say by and large, we are under the camp that it's hard. It's very challenging
Yeah.
to get significant mold illness and mold toxicity just from food by itself.
Yeah. I think can be certain things, two specific things come to mind that Megan and I talked about, coffee and peanuts that can cause symptom flares. I'll word it that way. Those are the two most common things. And we're talking like sneezing right after you eat them, maybe just having like some sinus issues around after you drink your cup of coffee or something like that. But yes, by and large, you would have to eat a lot in like some really bad, like moldy food for that to be a thing.
Yeah.
So most often that's not the case of how we get mold.
Yeah. And just like once again, there's some controversy around this, but the camp that we typically fall under is food by itself, typically not, especially as we're healing, especially if you do have a lot of histamine symptoms. We're going to get into symptoms next. Yeah, I mean, peanuts are something I do not eat, just because I am aware of their mold content, and there are plenty of other options for me. It's not a ride or die for me with peanuts. Coffee is a little bit more of a ride or die for me. However, I just drink clean coffee that is tested for mold. And there's quite a few companies out there that are very clean, very well known. And so there's a lot of options there for you. I can give up coffee. I have done it many times. I did go around my recent trip to Colombia. I didn't drink coffee for 2 weeks. I did just fine. I did not detox, I didn't have any detox symptoms, no headaches, no craziness. I really love the ritual. I just stopped my coffee mug sitting right here on my desk, even though it's the afternoon right now, just for emotional support maybe. And it's not something that I choose to not have
No.
right now. And so it doesn't have to be for you either.
Yeah, and I am also that person. I desire to drink coffee. I it has a special place in my heart. So, but I mean, again, like there's better brands out there that do test for this stuff, and you will notice the difference if you switch to a better coffee. And I also wanted to add this in. I'm not sure if you've heard this, Megan, but Valencia peanuts are a specific peanut
Mm.
from like Spain, and they process them and store them a different way. And they are known to have a lower mold content.
Oh,
I cannot eat like regular peanut butter, but if I find a peanut butter that is Valencia peanuts, I can eat it and have no issues. And my mom is the same way, and my fiance is the same way. Once we all switched over to it, we were like, holy cow. So if you haven't, you should look into that.
Okay, well, great. I do, I still learn things all of the time too, and it's amazing. So I wasn't familiar, but that's great. So there you go. There's a peanut butter option. I don't know
Yeah.
if I've had peanut butter in close to 10 years at this point. I might be okay still, but you never know. I might want to try it eventually.
Yeah, just another option for other people. And I think actually like Trader Joe's organic peanut butter is Valencia peanuts,
Oh,
and that's a good one. So if you are someone who knows that when you eat peanuts, you have sinus issues and flare-ups, maybe give the Valencia peanut butter a try. See how you do.
well, there you go. Learn something new every day. I'm
Yeah.
here for it. All right, so let's talk about symptoms here. And we're going to go over a lot of symptoms. And same thing, we're going to go over some testing options here as well. And that might be all we get through today. But I want to acknowledge a couple of things here. So we're going to go over a pretty comprehensive list of symptoms. Now, some people may have all of these. You may just, as we're running through, like check, 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 check. Yep, I have all of these. You may only have a few. And just because you only have a few, we want to look at some testing. We want to look at some other things. We always look at blood work first. And we're also going to talk about other testing and some other things here. But not everyone is crazy symptomatic, like crazy levels of illness. There are some big trends that we will see from symptoms. But I have a client right now who, she's like a handful of symptoms. She still functions. Now, she's a little bit in a lot of it in a fight or flight state. So I think she's got some cortisol that she's and adrenaline she's running off of, which is common. And just to acknowledge that you don't have to be on death's door almost and just stuck in bed to have mold illness. This, once again, everyone's different. Everyone's body is different. People process things differently. So, there's a checklist that we go through when we do our consults and things that we always look at. And we'll go through the big ones here. We're going to go through a very comprehensive list, but we're also going to go through big highlights that we like to go over. If you ever have a consult or have had one with us, you've probably heard us ask some of these questions, and we're trying to rule out mold or rule it in or see if we need to do some additional testing for that because how we address that is just really different. So, yeah. Shannon, you wanna start on the list?
Yes. So in general, again, keep this in mind, mental health issues like anxiety, depression, just nervous system dysregulation, chronic health issues like POTS, any hypermobility issues, and I'm probably going to butcher this, the go ahead, say it, Megan.
Ehlers-Danlos syndrome, HEDS.
Do you want to explain that?
Yeah. So I want to actually explain both all the things that you talked about so far. Yeah. So the mental health struggles. So, and we'll go over this a little bit deeper in the testing piece, but mold impacts neurotransmitter production and transportation, let alone just all of the gut here, really significantly. Mold can travel up into your brain and you can end up with a neurotoxin. There's several neurotoxins. One of the ones that we'll often test for is quinolinic acid. And when we see this, it's a neurotoxin, meaning there's a toxin going on in your brain, which obviously is not good if there's toxins in your brain. Mold is not the only thing that can travel to your brain. Heavy metals can also travel to your brain. This can contribute to a lot of cognitive issues, brain fog, trouble concentrating, trouble remembering, trouble recalling words. This can often, and this is not a blanket statement by any means, but I've just seen this too often to not mention this, that a lot of, especially adults who maybe later developed ADD, ADHD type symptoms, or even like early menopause type symptoms of that, like trouble remembering or trouble recalling, which many physicians will just dismiss as you're starting the transition and your brain just starts to go downhill. No. Yes, that can happen. It can be a symptom. And there also might be some other stuff going on. And when once again, we've seen this too many times that even people who've been diagnosed and on medication for a long time, they may feel better. Their cognition may be better, a reduction in symptoms, potentially a reduction in medication. Always talk to your doctor about that before you do that. But they feel clearer and feel less extreme symptoms around that. So that can be a really big impact here. So anxiety and depression and some of these cognitive issues, especially because one of the tests that we look at, one of the reasons why we have a preference for testing is because we're looking at these neurotransmitters and neurotransmitter pathways. So that's really important to understand. And I mean, you can be on medication, you can be like doing all of the right things. And if you are not producing your neurotransmitters, serotonin, dopamine, epinephrine, norepinephrine, man, are you going to have a really hard time just having a semblance of good mental health. So just like to put that out there.
Yeah.
Mold can also trigger a variety of really chronic issues. Autoimmunity, I'll put up there for sure. Mold is a huge root cause of autoimmune issues. Things like POTS. So POTS is, and I should have looked this up beforehand. I don't remember what the acronym, all of it stands for. It's quite long. But POTS has a lot to do with, really common symptoms like really dizzy, fainting, so tired. I mean, the most tired. I've worked with a handful of POTS clients, and I mean, falling asleep for hours in the middle of the day, like falling asleep in hallways, in random places, like literally not being able to stay awake. Fainting, dizzy spells are really common. And a lot of it has to do with water intake, electrolyte balance, or usually imbalance, is where a lot of the issues come from. But POTS for me is more of a symptom than a root cause. And a huge root cause of POTS is often mold illness or mold toxicity. Same thing with hypermobility issues. Ehlers-Danlos syndrome is one of those. It's not the only one, but it is a more common one. And basically, I mean, there's a really simple series of tests that you can go through, finding a physician who is aware of all of these, let alone support and how to address this. That's a whole other thing. If you have these issues, I do have a lot of resources, so never hesitate to reach out. Once again, I've worked with a handful of clients over the years who have all of these. These often go hand in hand too. But your joints don't stay in place is often one of the most common symptoms. It's like shoulders popping out, hips popping out, sacrum, like the base of your spine, like shifting and moving, and it causes a lot of chronic pain. Not everyone who has fibromyalgia, but I've seen a handful of cases of people who've been diagnosed with fibromyalgia, which is kind of an IBS blanket kind of, we don't know what you have, but your symptoms fit this. Sometimes that is hypermobility related, sometimes not. But once again, this is a symptom. Not saying we don't address symptoms, because yes, there's physical support inside and out that needs to be addressed here. And there's a lot of ways that stability, movements and stability support that is really, really necessary. And so is addressing the mold. And obviously, often we will not see a major difference in these types of conditions until we address the mold. Once again, with POTS, like we look at water intake, we look at electrolyte balance in particular, or imbalances and all of the imbalances. There's special electrolytes we'll often use. I have a specific brand that I typically like and use, just it's geared more towards people who have POTS issues. Getting a diagnosis can be helpful, although very, very challenging. So those are all things that come along with mold sometimes.
Yeah. And I would say those are like the big three, I guess. And not everyone has those issues. I mean, I had, for example, like some of the mental health issues that came with it, but I didn't have like the other chronic issues like POTS that we just talked about. Other symptoms. So Lyme's disease, any viral issues, which blood work is really helpful here because we can see a lot of viral patterns in there.
Sinus. Also, sorry to interrupt. Just want to talk about this a little bit more too, because this is a little bit controversial as well. And my opinion has changed around this, especially. So I have a history of Epstein-Barr virus, which is a chronic viral issue. If you have a chronic viral issue, sometimes that is the root cause of your health issues. Oftentimes, these are not coming alone. And we need to look at other things. And I know there are practitioners out there and coaches out there who specialize in these chronic viral issues, and Lyme and EBV are not the only two. There are many, many others out there. I've recently seen one with HPV. A lot of mixed feelings about this. And I would just encourage you, if you have been diagnosed with chronic viral issues, please also make sure you're looking at other big things that can impact you. Because if you're only doing the viral and immune support and you're not addressing these bigger issues, or you haven't at least looked to see if are these impacting my health. Once again, it's not everyone, but I've seen this more often than not. You're never going to heal. My EBV has been in remission for many, many years. It was a huge part of putting my Hashimoto's into remission. And I spent a lot of time, money, and supplements on EBV treatment, on support that didn't work until heavy metals and parasites were addressed. So please also keep that in mind. There's also new and emerging research. I haven't done a crazy deep dive into this, but it kind of goes along with this, that you don't necessarily have to be bitten by a tick to test positive for Lyme. And testing positive for Lyme is a whole other topic of conversation. And how do you do that? And what is the best test to do that, or tests? But it appears that we don't necessarily have to be bitten by a tick in order for that to pop up. And it can be triggered by other things like mold illness, mold toxicity. So just please keep that in mind if that sounds like you, especially if you've been trying to heal from these things for a really long time. You got to look at the bigger picture. And if you're working with someone who's so only focused on one thing, that's where so many of us get into trouble. And that's not the case for everyone, because it's absolutely not the case for everyone. But Shannon and I just have too much experience of being on the other side of being the client, on being the patient, and people only focusing on, like, hyper focusing on one or two things and missing that bigger picture. So we just want to bring that up.
Yeah, no, I'm glad you did bring that up. I mean, I had tested positive for Epstein-Barr virus, and this was like, I don't know, maybe like 7 years ago, when I was diving a lot deeper into all my health issues. And I don't even believe that it was addressed, now that I think about it. And oftentimes, I want to add this in too, when we're focusing on the mold, when we've tested, or when we've talked to someone and it's very apparent that mold is issue, yes, let's go for it, let's work on it. When we get to the end of it, your body will present other things that it's ready to work on. It's kind of like peeling back the layers of an onion. Like, things, once we've healed one thing, your body's like, okay, now I'm safe to, like, let this go and let's work on this portion. And we will see viral issues come up after we've dealt with the mold portion. And it's one thing about viral issues is it doesn't seem, from my experience, it doesn't take as long as mold, that's for sure, to kind of get things back in balance. So yeah, I mean, it's, again, not like you said, not everyone is like this. Every single person is different. Every case is different, but it is something to be aware of.
Exactly. You can continue, and I'll just continue to interrupt you every symptom that you say.
Go ahead. That works for me. So sinus issues. When we say sinus issues, we're talking about, like, postnasal drip, like chronic mucus issues, sinus headaches, sneezing frequently, maybe after you eat certain foods or whatnot, or just all the time at night. That is a pattern that I see, is at night having sinus issues.
It also goes with parasites.
Oh, yeah.
That's usually the bigger reason.
Yeah, with parasites, yeah. Gut issues. I would say the biggest thing here, because that's such another blanket term, is gut issues. And there's also so many things that go with that, like parasites and bacteria, which, again, if you have mold, you probably have some of these other things going on because they just pair together. Food sensitivities, I'll say that with gut issues. If you have tons of food sensitivities and you've done food sensitivity testing and eliminated all the things, and then which that's another topic for another time why we don't love food sensitivity testing. But if you're someone who just feels like you're sensitive to everything that you eat and it changes all the time, like one day, you eat something and you're fine, and the next day you eat the same thing and you have all these stomach issues, that's a really big red flag in our eyes that mold might be a thing.
And the reason
Um,
being for that is as food sits in the fridge, it grows histamine. And many, not everyone, but many, many people who have mold issues also have histamine and or oxalate issues. There are some other things that can also come along with this, but histamine and oxalate issues are super, super common. Once again, this is why some of the testing options that we prefer are the ones that we prefer for a reason. And so, yeah, so foods higher in histamine, leftovers. So it is not uncommon for, you'll do fine one day on something, it sits in the fridge overnight, you have leftovers, and all of a sudden you're sneezing and coughing, and all of a sudden like lots of mucus, rashes, hives, like whatever histamine responses happen, and that's because the food is growing excess histamine as it sits in the fridge.
yeah. And something else to add on to that too is when you've dealt with this and you start to you get stressed about it because you don't understand, you don't know, like, oh, great, I'm going out to eat with my friends, I'm going to eat this food, I'm going to have this horrible reaction. So then there's also that mental health slash nervous system regulation piece that comes into this too, where it's like if you are just like so afraid to eat anything, like again, like we get it, we've been there, we hear you, we see you. So yeah, lots of stuff with being sensitive to all different kinds of foods. That's a huge part of that.
Yeah, and healthy foods, foods that are good for you. I mean, if you look
Yep.
at the high histamine list, it is a lot of really healthy food on there. So, spinach and strawberries and avocado in certain amounts, and that,
Yeah.
all that really goes. It's so challenging, and I will say, a low histamine diet is the hardest elimination diet, and I did most of them. And I spent many, many years on elimination diets, but a low histamine diet was the most challenging for me, especially with like how you're cooking your food and the leftover piece and just like all of these really good nutrient dense, like yummy foods that I love were all high in histamine and just such a challenge.
Yeah, especially when you're trying to combine multiple healing diets
Oh my
together, then
God.
you feel like you're left with nothing, which we'll do a whole other episode about that. But yeah,
Oh
so
yeah.
the food sensitivity stuff, a huge red flag in our eyes. And then internal, like this feeling of internal itching is also another sign. And not everyone has this, but just like feeling that's the best way I can describe it is like a feeling of you're itching internally, or like maybe there's something on you, but there's not. That's the best way to describe that. That's kind of a not so common one, but a lot of people who it's very obvious that they're dealing with mold may have that symptom.
Yeah, and that can often get worse at the end of the day. It can get worse in heat.
Mm.
Heat sensitivity is a really, really big one, especially like anywhere around anywhere where there's tighter fitting clothes, like for women, like who are wearing a bra. Like a lot of times we'll see it right along the bra line. After you eat certain foods, like higher histamine foods, you might start to just like randomly start to itch and not know why, and a rash may or may not present itself, or you may get red, even just like some redness may pop up, or it may not, but you just like feel itchy. And I mean, I've had so many people have to just like have Benadryl always on hand because that's the only thing that will help them. The other thing with that I just came to mind is like showering with people with significant, and once again, this is not everyone, but people with significant mold issues will often have a hard time showering and get really itchy after a shower. And you have to do like a cold shower, and even sometimes just the water touching your skin can activate a histamine response, activate that itchiness that happens in your body. So just like if that is you, definitely look at mold.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. In that kind of, since we're talking about skin issues in general, like psoriasis, eczema, I would say those are the two big ones. or if you have like red, even like red blotchy patches on your skin, that is a sign of histamine or histamine issues. What else am I missing? Any other skin?
Rashes, hives,
Yeah.
especially around some of the things I just mentioned. Heat. If you get itchy after you get hot or you're in the sun, sensitivity to the sun, people with mold often, not always, once again, but often can have a hard time with like sauna work because the heat activates that and they can end up with rashes or hives. Same thing with certain foods. Like if you notice like rashes popping up or hives starting to pop up, swelling popping up after eating certain foods, that's often histamine related. It may not actually be an allergy. Sometimes it is. Allergies are a real thing.
Right.
Not dismissing that. And a lot of times, if it's a new thing, it's probably not an allergy. It may just be a significant histamine response and your body's really responding. You may also notice histamine load also plays a really big role here as well. And so we think about high histamine foods. If we're eating a lot of foods high in histamine or high in oxalates, depending on what and how you're sensitive to, that can play a big role. Time of the year. Right now it's spring. I'm in Virginia. Everything is covered in yellow. It's just pollen everywhere, which for many people, that's going to increase their histamine load and histamine production inside of their body, which can trigger other responses. If you are sensitive to heat and you've been hot a lot, there was something else I just thought of and I just lost it. Gosh, I don't remember. But if you're a menstruating female, histamine and estrogen attach to the same receptor. So you may notice an increase in your symptoms as your estrogen starts to rise, like right at the start of your periods. That is also a very telltale symptom that there is some correlation. Mold is most common, not saying it's only the only thing, but mold is often, we definitely want to look at mold. If symptoms arise, those kind of histamine type of symptoms arise right before and during the start of your period.
Yeah, definitely. And I just want to throw this in here that can change. I am that person. It changed. I think there's like 1 month out of the year at this point where there's maybe a couple foods that are in the ragweed family that I avoid. And other than that, like I'm golden. I can eat a wide variety of foods, so it can change. All right. So hormone imbalances. If you, I mean, this can mean so many things. I'm like, where do I start here? Just in general, like hormone imbalances, if you have irregular periods, if you have very painful periods, I would say those are probably the two big things. If you don't have periods at all or have like, very stretched out cycles, like that's another thing. In I feel like that one is a little blanket term-ish because there's so many things that can affect our hormones. But if it's really bad, coupled with these other things that we're talking about, good indication that mold may be an issue here.
Exactly.
Um,
And if you've done hormone work and it
yeah,
hasn't worked, or you've noticed very
yes,
little improvement, it's time to look deeper. The other thing I'll say is, and once again, mold is not the only thing that does this, but I also experience this, is if you go into early perimenopause. I was in early perimenopause before the age of 30, which is not normal. There's a reason why. And hormone imbalances for me, I had really high estrogen levels. Progesterone was on the lower end, but it wasn't crazy low. For me, it was just I had so much excess estrogen because I also had heavy metals and parasite issues, and my poor little liver could not keep up with my life. And so it sent me into what looked like early perimenopause. And I had a lot of symptoms around that. So that is also very much on the table.
yes, yeah, good point. And the other things here, just to kind of wrap this up, is like chronic inflammation, especially swelling of the hands and the feet. We already talked about food sensitivities, sensitivity to supplements. If you are a person who has tried to go through multiple protocols and you just can't get through it, you can't even take like the lowest dose of things, really, really, really strong indication that you need to look into something deeper like mold. I mean, yeah, this was me. I also have a handful of clients who are like this, and we're working on mold. And if that's you, you might want to look into this a little bit more. The last thing is just sensitivity to like lights, smells, and sounds, which I think you may have mentioned already. But I mean, other than that, I know that's a really extensive list. There's so many things on it. Anything else we're missing, Megan?
Yeah, I mean, chronic fatigue is often a really, really big one. Just being tired all the time. If you have had symptoms for a while and they just like keep compounding, and it's just like every couple months, you're like, gosh, I just have another symptom and another symptom. That's super, super common. It can really impact your hair, skin, and nails as well. And once again, if you're looking with someone who's only looking at like your thyroid or sex hormones, the bigger things can be missed. And so that's really common. So yeah, it can be very challenging. Once again, this was a lot of symptoms here, and I think we're going to wrap it up at this and then talk about testing. And once again, this might be a three-parter here because there's so much that goes into mold, and the whole goal of this podcast is to do really deep dives into a lot of these topics that we just don't have time for on other platforms. So I want to make sure we do mold due justice that it deserves and that you guys deserve as listeners here to help you understand this. But yeah, if you have a handful of these symptoms, it's worth taking a look and asking some bigger questions here. And once again, we look at blood work first, and then we can recommend other testing. We'll get into testing next time. We'll do a part 2 and likely a part 3. And so, yeah, just the other thing is, and I know we kind of touched on this before, but if you feel like you're crazy and you can't get any answers in Western medicine and or in the more holistic health kind of realm, you're not alone. We have been there. I have been told it is all in my head so many times by so many people in the Western medicine and functional medicine space, and that I'm fine. There's nothing wrong with me. All my testing, I've talked about gut testing before, like my gut is perfect. Okay, but I still have all the gut symptoms, even though my gut looks perfect on paper here. And so if this sounds like you, it is worth looking into mold and just taking that extra step to be like, okay, is this something that I'm dealing with? Is this something that's going on in my body? And if so, how can I test? How can I look into this and start address it? Because you're not crazy. At the end of the day, look, like what's going on in your body. No one else knows your body better than you do. And if you think there's something wrong, and obviously there are mental health conditions where we can, other stuff can come up here, but I'd say by and large, if you feel like there's something off in your body, listen to your intuition and ask more questions and dig a little bit deeper and fight for yourself, because we all had to do that too. I can't tell you how many people were just handed me meds again, said you have a history of anxiety and depression, we need to go back on meds. And that was not on the table for me. That was not something that I was open to discussing, because I knew that wasn't the answer for me. And yes, I think there is a time and place for medication, but it wasn't. I had already been on it for so long and it didn't work. And so I knew there was something else. So I just encourage you to ask more questions, keep fighting for yourself. I know it's exhausting, but also there are people out there that will believe you.
Yes. Yeah. Thank you for sharing that. I think that's super important here. One last small thing to add to is not everyone has mold. If you have some of these symptoms going on, I don't want you to listen to this episode and then just get super stressed out about it and go into major Google research. It's, if you're a person who has a bunch of these symptoms piled up and you have tried multiple things and it's not working, I would say that's, obviously you always want to advocate for yourself and look into this stuff. But if you're feeling fatigued, for instance, and have this one thing, like don't freak out. That doesn't mean that you have mold. There could be other very easy fixes going on. So I just kind of want to throw that out there too.
Yes, exactly. And please listen to part 2, because we're going to go over testing. And that's going to be really helpful in determining your next steps. Once again, we do offer free consultations. There's a link in the show notes, in our bio, wherever you're listening or watching us. All of our social media, there's always a link in our bio to book a free consult with us. It is 100% free. We're not trying to scam you. We're not trying to, yes, if you want to work with us, we would love to work with you and we would love to chat with you about that. There's also never any pressure to work with us. So always just want to throw that out there. Once again, we are also a new podcast. Any likes, subscribes, follows, 5-star reviews, if any and all of that resonates with you, we would really, really appreciate it. It really helps us. And thank you so much for joining us. Thank you so much for listening, and stay tuned.